Today, we're looking at the worst snake deaths ever, from a barefoot farmer in India working flooded rice fields to a construction foreman in the Amazon whose worksite hid a lethal threat. But first, we begin in rural Florida, where we witness the terrifying last minutes of snake breeder Richard Kowalski. It was April 12, 2016, when the morning sun cast long shadows across a rural property outside Ocala, Florida. The converted barn sat isolated on 5 acres, housing 47 venomous snakes from 6 continents. The nearest neighbor lived nearly half a mile away, unaware of the deadly collection maintained beyond the palmetto brush. Richard Kowalski was 47 years old, a former University of Florida herpetology student who had dropped out during his junior year. Over 22 years, he had built a reputation in underground exotic animal circles as a fearless breeder. His grandfather's inherited property had been converted into a makeshift serpentarium, outfitted with climate control and enclosures constructed from cattle troughs and modified aquariums. His wife had filed for divorce 4 years earlier, taking their children back to Jacksonville as Richard's obsession consumed their marriage and finances. He supported himself through illegal sales to private collectors, holding permits for only a limited number of species, while maintaining 47 venomous snakes on site. Richard had survived 3 previous envenomations. At 29, a spitting cobra had struck his forearm, requiring hospitalization. A copperhead bit his hand 5 years later. In 2012, a Malayan pit viper struck his calf, sending him to the hospital for antivenin and a week of observation. Each survival reinforced his reputation for risk-heavy handling practices. The crown jewel of his collection was an exceptionally large king cobra, measuring over 14 feet in length, purchased for $8,000 and housed in a modified cattle trough measuring 8 by 4 feet. That Tuesday morning began with a mild hangover. Richard woke at 8:45 a.m. and walked to the barn. Inside, he worked through routine checks, noting that the king cobra had not eaten in nearly 3 weeks, a longer interval than his usual feeding schedule. Standard feeding protocol called for using a 3-foot hook with a secured rat to maintain distance. Instead, Richard hand-positioned a live rat to provoke a feeding response. At approximately 9:30 a.m., he unlatched the enclosure lid and leaned over the opening, extending his left hand with the squirming rat toward the far corner. His right hand gripped the edge of the trough for balance as he leaned forward, his upper body positioned deep over the enclosure. King cobras are the longest venomous snakes in the world, capable of raising nearly a third of their body off the ground while spreading their hood to full width. Their strike height can reach a standing adult's chest. They possess one of the largest venom yields of any snake species, delivering powerful neurotoxins capable of shutting down the nervous system and respiratory muscles. King cobras are highly alert animals with advanced spatial awareness and a strong memory for perceived threats. The cobra had been resting low along the enclosure floor, partially obscured by substrate and shadow. The rat's frantic movement triggered an immediate response. The massive snake surged upward, hood flaring wide as it closed the distance in a fraction of a second. Richard remained motionless. Then the cobra struck. The impact was reconstructed as sudden and forceful. Bite marks on Richard's right forearm below the elbow showed 2 deep punctures consistent with a king cobra strike. Tissue damage around the wounds indicated a brief hold before release, after which the snake retreated back into the enclosure. Scuff marks near the trough suggested Richard stumbled backward immediately after being struck. Blood pooled beneath his arm, forming 2 distinct drip patterns on the concrete floor. Investigators found no evidence of pressure being applied to the wounds and no outgoing emergency calls from his phone. Based on the location of blood stains and the position of his phone on the workbench 15 feet away, he appeared to have moved away from the enclosure shortly after the bite. Over the following period, the sequence of events was inferred from physical evidence inside the barn. The phone was recovered from the floor near the workbench, showing failed unlock attempts. Additional smears along the wall and bench edge suggested deteriorating coordination. Neurological impairment consistent with neurotoxic envenomation would explain the loss of fine motor control indicated by these signs. Further evidence supported progressive weakness. Saliva residue and disturbed items near the workbench were consistent with difficulty swallowing. Additional fingerprints and partial handprints lower on the wall suggested increasing muscle fatigue as he attempted to steady himself. Richard's body was found several feet from the workbench, positioned on his side. Bruising to the shoulder and head matched a fall onto the concrete floor. The absence of defensive injuries or crawl marks indicated that loss of muscle control had progressed rapidly after the collapse. Respiratory failure was determined to have occurred later. The position of his body and lack of movement marks beyond the fall site suggested he remained where he collapsed. The medical examiner concluded that paralysis of the muscles required for breathing led to shallow, ineffective respiration before complete respiratory arrest. Cardiac activity continued briefly after breathing ceased, consistent with hypoxic cardiac failure following neurotoxic envenomation. The following morning, a neighbor discovered the open barn door while checking fence lines along his property. Sheriff's deputies arrived within 20 minutes, followed by Florida Fish and Wildlife officers. Inspectors documented 47 venomous snakes, with 35 held beyond permitted allowances. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as respiratory failure due to venomous snakebite. All surviving snakes were transferred to licensed facilities. While Florida's exotic snake trade had claimed Richard Kowalski halfway across the world in rural India, another man would face a far more common but equally deadly encounter. It was August 19, 2015, when Ramesh Patil rose before dawn in the village of Kanapur, Maharashtra. The monsoon season had reached its peak, flooding rice paddies to knee-depth across the low-lying farmland. Heavy rains over the previous 3 days had displaced wildlife, pushing snakes into agricultural areas where small patches of higher ground offered the only refuge above the waterline. Ramesh was 34 years old, working a 3-acre rice plot inherited from his father. The land provided subsistence living for his wife, 4 children aged 3 through 12, and his elderly mother, all of whom shared a single-room home at the edge of the village. The household survived on approximately $700 annually, relying almost entirely on the success of the rice harvest and occasional seasonal labor. His field lay 1.5 miles from the village center, connected by a narrow dirt path that became slick and uneven during monsoon months. That morning began at 4:45 a.m. Ramesh drank chai quickly and departed at 5:10 a.m., carrying his curved sickle and a small cloth for wiping sweat and rainwater from his hands. The rice plants stood approximately 4 feet tall, heavy with developing grain that bent the stalks low over the flooded rows. Weather forecasts predicted additional afternoon storms, making early morning work essential before rising winds flattened the crop. He wore thin cotton clothing and no footwear, the standard practice for subsistence farmers in the region, allowing better footing in mud and water. Ramesh entered the field from the southwest corner, wading into knee-deep brown water. He began cutting rice stalks methodically, bundling them by hand and stacking them on narrow ridges between rows. Visibility through the dense vegetation remained limited to only a few feet, with submerged ground features impossible to distinguish beneath the surface. Russell's vipers are among Asia's most dangerous snakes, responsible for thousands of envenomations each year across the Indian subcontinent. Adults typically measure 3 to 5 feet in length, with thick bodies patterned in bold geometric markings that provide effective camouflage among mud, straw, and decaying vegetation. Their venom is primarily hemotoxic, disrupting blood clotting and damaging blood vessels, leading to progressive bleeding and systemic complications. Encounters increase sharply during monsoon season, when flooding drives vipers into cultivated fields and forces farmers to work barefoot in reduced visibility. The viper had taken refuge on a small elevated mud mound between 2 rice rows, just high enough to remain above the floodwater. Its brown and tan pattern blended into the surrounding debris. At approximately 6:25 a.m., Ramesh's cutting path brought him directly into the row where the snake rested. His left foot came down onto the viper's mid-body. The defensive strike followed immediately, fangs driving into the outer portion of his left ankle. The bite resulted in clear envenomation before the snake released and disappeared into the flooded field. 2 puncture wounds were visible just above the ankle bone, blood welling around them. Intense burning pain radiated from the bite site almost immediately. Within minutes, swelling became apparent, the skin around the ankle tightening as fluid accumulated. As time passed, darkening of the skin developed gradually as bruising spread outward from the wound. Ramesh dropped his sickle and began moving toward the village. Progress was slow along the muddy path. each step sending pain up his leg as swelling increased and stiffness set in. By the time he had covered most of the distance back, more than 30 minutes had passed since the bite. His pace reduced to short, uneven steps. As the effects of the venom progressed, additional symptoms became evident. Nausea set in, followed by repeated vomiting along the path. Blood began appearing along his gums and at his nose as clotting failed, leaving visible streaks on his clothing and hands. His vision blurred intermittently, and physical weakness became increasingly apparent as he struggled to maintain balance. Near the edge of the village path, less than an hour after the bite, his movements became unsteady. He took several steps before collapsing face forward into the mud. Blood continued seeping from his nose and mouth. His breathing became rapid and shallow as strength failed, and he remained where he fell. When Ramesh did not return by sunrise, his son Vikram was sent to look for him at approximately 7:30 a.m. Vikram found his father lying motionless along the path and ran back to the village for help. Several farmers responded, but no one in Kanpur owned a vehicle. A runner was dispatched to a larger village 2 miles away. Approximately 40 minutes passed before a motorcycle arrived. The journey to the hospital covered 35 miles over wet, uneven roads, taking more than 90 minutes. Ramesh Patil died shortly before arrival. His death reflected a pattern repeated across rural India each year, where delayed access to medical care and venom-induced bleeding make Russell's viper bites especially dangerous during monsoon season. While India's rice paddies had claimed Ramesh Patil, Australia's Outback would soon demonstrate that the world's most venomous snakes should never be underestimated. It was January 7th, 2017, a scorching summer day in the Australian Outback. By midday, temperatures had climbed to 42 degrees Celsius, baking the red earth and leaving the air heavy and still. The cattle station where Connor Mitchell worked sprawled across 150,000 acres of semi-arid scrubland, located more than 200 kilometers west of Longreach in central Queensland. The property operated as a self-contained operation, with fuel storage, machinery sheds, and worker quarters clustered around a central yard separated from grazing land by miles of fencing. Connor was 19 years old, originally from a Brisbane suburb. After dropping out of university, he took the station job seeking independence and experience away from city life. The work offered steady pay, long hours, and isolation far removed from the city. His social media accounts frequently featured photographs and short videos documenting his outback lifestyle to an audience of roughly 12,000 followers, including images of cattle musters, wide-open landscapes, and heavy machinery. He had been employed at the station for 8 months as a general hand, rotating through fencing repairs, yard maintenance, and equipment servicing. During his first week, Connor attended a mandatory safety orientation alongside other new hires. Management emphasized heat exposure, heavy equipment hazards, and venomous wildlife, with repeated instructions never to approach or interfere with snakes under any circumstances. Station policy required employees to report sightings and allow animals to move on without disturbance. Connor acknowledged the briefing and returned to work. That Saturday fell during the midday shutdown period, when extreme heat made outdoor labor unsafe. Most staff remained inside shaded quarters or rested near cooling fans and water tanks. Connor moved toward the equipment shed on the edge of the workyard, an area bordered by packed dirt, fuel drums, spare fencing materials, and parked vehicles that provided intermittent shade. Shortly before 1 p.m., he noticed a large snake resting along the shed's foundation, partially shaded from the sun. The snake measured roughly 5 feet in length, with a slender build and dark coloration that blended with the dirt and concrete. Based on its appearance and the region, it was later believed to be consistent with an inland taipan, also known as the fierce snake, an extremely venomous species occasionally encountered in remote central Queensland. Inland taipans possess venom dominated by powerful neurotoxins and myotoxins capable of rapidly disrupting nerve transmission, muscle function, and blood clotting. Envenomation can progress quickly, with severe symptoms developing within minutes. Although typically reclusive, inland taipans will strike defensively if cornered or threatened, often delivering multiple rapid bites. The snake remained still as Connor approached. When he moved closer, it shifted position, coiling tightly with its head raised. Connor stepped around the shed corner and returned with a wooden stake and an old canvas pillowcase, items commonly used for handling feed and debris. The narrow space between the shed wall and parked equipment limited the snake's escape route. Connor advanced to within several feet. As the stake moved toward the snake, It struck defensively, contacting the wood. Connor pulled back, then stepped forward again, extending the pillowcase. 2 defensive strikes landed in rapid succession, one to his left hand and another almost immediately to his right forearm. Afterward, the snake slipped beneath a nearby vehicle and disappeared. Connor stepped back and looked down at his arms. 2 puncture wounds were visible, blood seeping from both sides. Within minutes, the pain intensified, spreading rapidly up his limbs. Profuse sweating began almost immediately despite the dry heat, followed by nausea and dizziness. His condition deteriorated quickly. Muscle weakness set in within 15 minutes, first affecting his hands and forearms, then spreading to his shoulders and legs. His breathing became labored as coordination failed. He attempted to walk toward the main station buildings, roughly 400 meters away, but stopped repeatedly, bracing himself against fencing and equipment. Less than 30 minutes after the bite, Connor's gait collapsed entirely. His legs buckled near the edge of the workyard, and he fell onto the red dirt. He attempted to push himself upright once more before remaining where he lay, breathing shallowly as paralysis progressed. The station hand noticed Connor's absence shortly after 1:30 p.m. After a brief search of the yard and surrounding sheds, Nibbler located him unresponsive near the equipment area at approximately 1:40 p.m. Station management was notified immediately, and emergency protocols were activated. A call was placed for an aircraft. An aircraft was dispatched, but the remote location required significant travel time. Upon arrival, medical personnel pronounced Connor Mitchell dead at the scene. The cause of death was later attributed to rapid neurotoxic envenomation from an inland taipan, compounded by extreme heat and the absence of immediate antivenom. Station management conducted a formal review of safety procedures following the incident. While Queensland's Outback had claimed Connor Mitchell, deep within Brazil's Amazon rainforest, another man would soon discover how commercial pressure could override even the most basic safety instincts. It was November 23, 2014, in the dense rainforest of Pará State, Brazil. The BR-163 highway expansion project had been underway for 7 months, cutting a 50-meter corridor through previously undisturbed jungle. By mid-morning, temperatures had already reached 34 degrees Celsius, with humidity hovering near 90%. The air was heavy, and visibility along the cleared route was limited by lingering mist and dense vegetation pressing in from both sides. Beyond the cleared strip, the forest canopy closed in tightly, leaving little buffer between active work zones and wildlife habitat. João da Silva was 41 years old, an experienced construction foreman with 18 years spent on infrastructure projects across northern Brazil. The highway expansion represented his largest assignment to date, placing him in charge of 23 laborers responsible for clearing vegetation, organizing materials, and preparing the roadbed for heavy machinery. The site operated with minimal permanent facilities, relying on temporary shelters, fuel depots, and daily supply convoys traveling long distances over unfinished roads. Working conditions were punishing. The previous week, one of João's crew had been bitten by a fer-de-lance viper while moving brush. The man survived after receiving antivenom at a hospital nearly 4 hours away. Safety briefings were conducted regularly, but the realities of the project often overrode protocol. The schedule had slipped 3 weeks behind, and contractors faced escalating financial penalties for further delays. Wildlife encounters were considered unavoidable, and formal inspections of materials were often shortened to keep crews moving. That morning's task involved reorganizing cut timber planks stacked along the edge of the cleared corridor. Ongoing deforestation had displaced wildlife throughout the area, and snakes frequently sought shelter in lumber piles, equipment caches, and shaded ground disturbed by machinery. At approximately 9:15 a.m., João was working several yards ahead of the rest of his crew. His assigned partner had stepped away to use a portable toilet, leaving João alone at the stack. João approached a pile of boards that had shifted overnight and required straightening before machinery could pass. Without fully inspecting the gaps between the planks, he reached into a narrow space to reposition one of the boards. His right hand entered the shaded interior of the pile. Bushmasters are the longest venomous snakes in the Americas, heavy-bodied pit vipers capable of exceeding 8 feet in length. They possess heat-sensing pits that allow them to detect warm-blooded animals in low light and confined spaces. Their venom is primarily hemotoxic, damaging blood vessels and tissue while interfering with clotting mechanisms. Bushmasters are typically nocturnal and reclusive, but they will strike defensively when disturbed at close range, especially when escape routes are limited. The bushmaster had taken refuge within the lumber pile after its surrounding habitat was cleared. Coiled tightly between the boards, the snake was concealed from view. Joao's hand entered within inches of its head. The defensive strike followed immediately. The snake's head lunged forward, and its fangs drove deep into Joao's hand. He shouted and jerked backward as the snake released and withdrew deeper into the pile. Blood began flowing from the puncture wounds almost immediately, and swelling developed rapidly across the back of his hand. Joao stumbled away from the lumber stack, clutching his injured hand. Within minutes, the swelling became pronounced, and severe pain radiated up his forearm. The skin around the bite darkened as bleeding spread beneath the surface. Crew members rushed to assist. One worker applied an improvised tourniquet above the elbow, a common response in remote work sites, despite medical guidance discouraging its use in viper bites. The nearest hospital capable of treating envenomation was 87 kilometers away, reachable only by rough access roads connecting to the main highway. 3 workers loaded Joao into the back of a pickup truck and began the drive, navigating deep ruts, loose gravel, and construction traffic. Progress was slow and uneven as they attempted to cover ground quickly without worsening his injuries. Approximately 30 minutes after the bite, Joao began vomiting repeatedly. Bleeding became visible along his gums and nose as the venom disrupted clotting. His clothing was stained with blood, and his skin appeared pale as his blood pressure dropped. Swelling continued to advance along his arm, restricting movement and worsening pain. As the journey continued, Joao became increasingly weak. He lost consciousness roughly 90 minutes after the bite, his breathing shallow and irregular. Despite continued efforts to reach medical care, he died in the truck before arriving at the hospital. His death was later attributed to systemic envenomation and hemorrhagic shock resulting from the snake bite. Authorities opened an investigation into the incident. Inspectors cited multiple safety deficiencies related to wildlife hazard management, emergency response planning, and medical preparedness at the site. The construction company was fined and was required to implement additional medical safeguards, including on-site antivenom access and trained response personnel. The project was suspended for 6 weeks, while corrective measures were put in place. While Brazil's rainforest had demonstrated the lethal consequences of prioritizing schedule over safety, South Africa's suburbs would soon reveal that even experienced handlers could fatally underestimate Africa's most feared serpent. It was June 14, 2013, in a quiet residential suburb outside Durban, in South Africa's KwaZulu-Natal province. Thabo Ndlovu was 52 years old, a well-known community member who volunteered as a snake relocator. Over more than 15 years, he had removed and relocated over 200 snakes from homes and yards in the surrounding area. He performed these removals free of charge, viewing the work as a public service. At the time, South African law did not require formal certification for private snake handlers. His equipment reflected that informal status: a 3-foot snake hook, a canvas cloth snake bag, and thick leather work gloves. On 5 previous occasions, his call-outs had involved black mambas. Each of those removals had ended without injury. The call came at approximately 3:15 p.m. from a homeowner, Mrs. Sarah Botha. Her children had discovered a large snake inside their garage. Based on her description of its size and coloration, Thabo suspected a black mamba. He drove roughly 18 kilometers to the address. Upon arrival, Mrs. Botha explained that her younger child had seen the snake coiled in the far corner of the garage. Thabo assessed the situation from the open doorway. The snake was visible roughly 4 meters inside, its gray-brown body partially concealed behind stored items. Based on its proportions, it appeared to be a large specimen, estimated at approximately 9 to 10 feet in length. Mrs. Botha and her children retreated into the house while Thabo prepared to enter the garage. He indicated the removal would be brief. He stepped inside, carrying his snake hook and bag. The bag hung from his left shoulder, while his right hand held the hook extended in front of him. The snake remained coiled and alert, tracking his movement. Thabo positioned himself approximately 1 meter from the animal and slowly extended the hook toward its mid-body. Black mambas are Africa's longest venomous snakes, commonly reaching lengths of 8 to 10 feet. Despite their name, their bodies are typically gray or brown, with the black referring to the dark coloration inside their mouths. They are capable of extremely rapid movement and possess highly potent neurotoxic venom that interferes with nerve transmission, leading to progressive paralysis, particularly of the respiratory muscles. Black mambas are not inherently aggressive, but will strike defensively with speed when escape routes are limited. As the hook made contact, Thabo began lifting gently. The mamba reacted instantly. Its body twisted along the length of the hook, redirecting its head toward him. The first strike landed on the right side of his neck. Before he could retreat, the snake struck again, biting his left forearm, followed immediately by a third strike to his right shoulder. The entire sequence lasted only moments. The snake then dropped to the floor and escaped through a gap beneath the garage door. Thabo staggered backward and exited the garage. Blood was visible where the snake had struck his neck. The severity of the situation was immediately apparent, as bites near major blood vessels allow rapid systemic absorption of venom. He sat down against the exterior wall and instructed Mrs. Botha to call for an ambulance. Within minutes, early symptoms appeared. Excessive salivation developed, and a metallic taste became noticeable. His left eyelid began to droop, and swallowing grew difficult. Speech became increasingly slurred as muscle control weakened. A neighbor who was a physician arrived and remained with Thabo, monitoring his condition while emergency services were en route. By approximately 8 minutes after the bites, Thabo's breathing became labored, with shallow, effortful breaths. His ability to speak diminished further, and his vision narrowed as oxygen levels dropped. An ambulance arrived shortly thereafter. Paramedics initiated oxygen support and prepared for rapid transport, recognizing the signs of severe neurotoxic envenomation. Antivenom was not administered on scene and was instead prepared for immediate use upon hospital arrival. Thabo was transported to the nearest hospital, located less than 10 minutes away. Upon arrival, emergency staff administered antivenom and initiated mechanical ventilation. Despite aggressive treatment, including additional antivenom and cardiovascular support, Thabo's respiratory function continued to decline. He suffered cardiac arrest and was pronounced dead at 4:02 p.m., approximately 45 minutes after the initial bites. Post-mortem findings were consistent with severe neurotoxic envenomation leading to respiratory failure. The investigation that followed noted that Thabo's equipment was inadequate for handling a large black mamba in a confined space. His cloth bag offered no rigid containment, and the hook length provided limited margin for error. Authorities emphasized the importance of proper training and specialized equipment for snake removals involving highly venomous species. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.